staying with us. This is the afternoon edition of Newsfeed. I am joined in the studio by Sonia Carstens, who's the spokesperson for the United National Transport Union, as well as Zwelinzima Mavavi, General Secretary of the South African Federation of Trade Unions. Now, just before the break, we were making the ties and connecting the dots between the rate of unemployment that we're experiencing in the country, as well as this upsurge of violence, shops looting, shops being burned, attacks on those who are perceived to be taking their jobs, for example. And you were commenting and saying that you actually have seen some sort of a difference in Transnet.
That's correct. We've seen that there's a sort of a clean out at Transnet and at the Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa. We've seen senior managers who's been implicated in various allegations for years who are now facing disciplinary charges, and we welcome that. Although on an operational level, down on ground level, we don't experience any difference. So for the worker at the bottom end of the row, there's no change in his or her circumstances. But at the top level side, we've seen changes, and that's positive to us.
And your comments regarding that, any changes in any of the strata, whether it's top management or the workers?
Well, I think we must all accept that the carnage that lasted for almost 10 years have been put to a stop. The deployment of Gupta-linked cronies that was driving South Africa straight to a crony capitalist state, a predator state, at least have stopped. The bleeding from that perspective have come to an end. But the damage is massive. And if you look at the story of SAA, SABC, Eskom, Denel, Petro SA, even Transnet and Prasa, the damage was massive. I mean, big. We're talking not just millions here. We're talking about billions of rands that have been lost, but we're talking about massive damage to the South Africa's economy. For example, I was just hearing your headlines now. Statistics South Africa says the economy have rebounded by a 3.1% in the second quarter, yes, which is absolutely great news for any South African. But I remember that perhaps one of the biggest drivers to that 3.2% decline in the GDP in the first quarter was the electricity cuts and rollovers driven by Eskom.
And that still remains South Africa's biggest threat.
It's a biggest threat. You can imagine if the Eskom as a company was to collapse, what calamity that will bring to the rest of the economy. And we can only hope that the era of those rolling blackouts is over, so that the economy can be given a space to breathe, and that we can sustain this economic growth that we have seen in the second quarter. That's how important the state-owned enterprises are to the South African economy. But overall, whilst we must recognize, for example, the clean-out that is happening at Prasa, and remember that clean-out is driven by the chairperson, Popo Molefe, who was one of the first victims of that carnage that I was referring to. Remember, he was the chairperson, yes, of Transnet. He was driven out there as if he was the thief when he was trying to do something about the extent of the pillaging at Transnet. So that's one of the things that we ought to celebrate. We can only hope that going forward, all the state-owned enterprises will be prioritized. The acting phenomenon will come to an end, and people with the requisite skills, hopefully who are emerging with the necessary experience from within the state-owned enterprises, will be given an opportunity to steer the ship away from the disaster that we speak about today in terms of what has been the impact.
The president, a short while ago, a couple of months ago, had a meeting with some of the CEOs of 20 or so of the state-owned enterprises. They had an opportunity to air their grievances, and what they had to say was pretty much in line, and they had the same problems that they were complaining about. One of them, the role of the oversight that was being given by the government representatives that were on the boards. They also spoke about inconsistencies in how boards were actually, put together and compiled, and also spoke about interference from government themselves in running their businesses. Yes, the dialogues are underway, but do you think enough has been done and the right type of conversations are being had to allow CEOs to be CEOs of SOEs? Your thoughts?
No, absolutely not. I think that much more needs to be done. I think that we've seen changes so far, but not nearly enough. Firstly, on our side, for instance, we've asked for greater collaboration between PRASA and between Transnet, simply because they use the same infrastructure, they use the same railway lines. If we don't turn around the transport in South Africa and we don't go from roads to rail, the trucks simply are now transporting the massive loads on our roads, which is supposed to be on rail, and that would take a lot of commuters off the roads. So from our side, we believe that the steps are going in the right direction, but we still have a lot to do.
Well, there are important steps that ought to be taken, but the past still lingers. If you look at what came out on the Sunday newspaper, that Mxakwe, the current CEO of SABC, and 2 other executives had submitted formal complaints to the board, complaining exactly about the same issues of interference, the same issues that were raised by the CEO of SAA. And I think that if one CEO that resigned from Eskom was to open up, he will raise exactly the same issues, but he decided to just walk away. And because he feels, I think he felt absolutely undermined. Who will not be undermined? Look at the disorganization of government. At SAA, they have the normal executives, they have the chairperson, and they have a government oversight task team in addition to the Minister of Public Enterprises, and also in addition to another minister who's also keeping them on their toes, the Minister of Energy. Then they have something they call now the, what they call it, that's officer? We call it the privatization officer, but they have another term for it because we believe that the ultimate goal of all of this bundling up of the state-owned enterprises, the suggestions by the treasurer that we must sell all of the coal power stations, and the bringing in of the external people who we suspect will be coming from the IMF and the World Bank, is driving another program which we are extremely worried about.
And this is contained in the Minister of Finance's latest proposition.
It is also there.
Paper, yes.
It is there, but it is also the message that have been coming from the presidency. Overall, we're still very worried that we are fighting the same battle we started to fight in 1995 when the former government under the President Mandela and the deputy then Thabo Mbeki started to drive the privatization program that led to the adoption of GIA unilaterally in June 1996 and leading to a massive job loss bloodbath in Telkom and many other parts of the state-owned enterprises. But then when you drove the program of both neoliberalism, privatization, commercialization, that led to the increase of the prices of electricity, of water, and many other services that are provided by the state-owned enterprises. Then you combine that with looting and corruption. Oh, I can tell you now, there's nothing that have discredited the role of the state in the recent past than the ANC government itself.
Would I then be correct in summarizing, because unfortunately our time together is up, in saying that you believe that, yes, the president has done some work, but hardly enough to alleviate the kind of pressures that you're facing, particularly within the transportation industry, and that we need a total overhaul? that we are still going in the same direction that we were going before, that in order to turn things around, we cannot be looking at complete privatization, that the stench is deep and the rot is deep, and that the Guptas are just perhaps an example of what could be existing at a much larger scale.
And if we don't take decisive steps, hopefully from this Zondo Commission, because we're hearing so much rot out of it, it can't just be that this is good for our ears. We hope that the President's promise that there is a special unit looking at the Zondo Commission in particular as to what steps must be taken to put people and prosecute and put them into prison is something that we will live to experience. And we hope that the overall message of clean up that Pravin Gordhan has been preaching, and which must hopefully not include privatizing and further commercializing and putting these things off the reach of the marginalized poor, will be a message that takes us into a different direction.
Well, thank you for your time, sir. In 30 seconds.
From our side, we would like to see less investigations and more actions. We've had investigation upon investigation upon investigation. Now, the most recent one, once again, an investigation into PRAZA. We want to see prosecutions, arrests and prosecutions. That at the end of the day will bring alleviation to the problem.
All right. Thank you very much to both of you for your time this afternoon.